Hello and welcome to this weekly prediction video by CastCast. I am your host, Casty Streeter. And without further ado, let's get into it, starting with Saturday's games. We have Houston Texans visiting the Kansas City Chiefs. Now, Houston obviously has already secured their division. Really, the only reason for them to maybe play is to try and get a better seed, which I just think is very unlikely. And, we have the Kansas City Chiefs. Obviously, the huge buzz about them this week was how significant is Patrick Mahomes' injury? What's going on with him? They don't even have an injury designation for him for the game. I think it's a big smoke screen in a way. The Chiefs, obviously, with a solid lead now over the Bills, technically two games. They would need to lose two out of their three games, and to give up the number one seed to the Bills, assuming the Bills win out as well. But looking at this game, I personally think that Houston, with their shoddy O line being the primary reason why I don't think that they can win against a Kansas City pass rush with Chris Jones and several other guys that get to the quarterback well. I just wonder what the Houston Texans game plan is, you know, to play against the Chiefs. And ordinarily, I would say that I think they have a solid shot, being able to force pressure on Patrick Mahomes with their pass rush. But I just wonder how well they're going to be able to do offensively, where Kansas City is going to do a good job of taking away Nico Collins and Tank Dell. You don't have any Stephon Diggs. And, last week was a porous running game from the Texans where Mixon couldn't get going, Joe Mixon. And, so looking at this game, I just don't expect the Chiefs to drop it, to be honest with you. Obviously, it's a Saturday game, and you think, with the Chiefs, it's kind of like a primetime game, and it's at Arrowhead, so that stadium's going to be very loud. And I just don't see the Texans overcoming that. So I'm going with the Chiefs on Saturday at home over the Texans. Moving on, we have another game, Steelers Ravens. The Steelers and the Ravens. The last game, the Steelers really kind of handled the Ravens. And to me, when I watched it, I just didn't really get the sense that the Ravens were doing very good play calling and that sort of thing. And, Pittsburgh obviously got handled last week by the Eagles, and the Ravens won soundly against the Giants, obviously a team that's, one of the worst records in the league. Looking at this, it's at M&T, and, the Ravens are seeking revenge, this being a huge game now, with them potentially being able to move up in the division and become the division leader because of the Steelers' woes that they have had as recently. This looked like the Steelers could really run away with it. And now we have a pivotal game in, essentially like prime time because, like I said, it's the second Saturday game. And overall, I think that the Ravens are going to be out for blood. I think they're going to lean on their strengths a little bit more. They didn't really run it that well against Pittsburgh. And I guess, let me check one thing. With the Steelers, that's a huge thing to address as if TJ Watt is going to play. And yet he's without an injury designation as well. But overall, to me, looking at it, it's like their record without him was really, really bad. They've only won like once when he's been injured and he's been on the team, because of what a dynamic, defensive playmaker he is, but I think that the Ravens this time around, it's going to be a little bit of a different story, but I still think that it could be a really gritty game. Obviously Pittsburgh took it on the chin last week, but I think that Baltimore, I think they know what's at stake with this game, much like with my Packers Lions game weeks ago. It's like if you don't win this, you're essentially only going to be a wild card spot with it being that much closer to the end of the season. So I'm going with Baltimore in this game over the Steelers at home, and essentially a primetime single slot game. Moving on, we have Rams Jets. The Jets, as we all know, won and beat the Jaguars last week in a pretty high scoring affair, over 50 points scored. And the Rams, obviously, the last time we saw them, it was a doozy of a game on Thursday night against San Fran where they won. You know, you'd think that they're going to be able to do well in this game. I'll say this, I think that the Rams have really had a kind of doozy of a running game where it's like it's very average with Kyren Williams, but he's ran it 29 times each the last couple of games, and I think they're really trying to get him going and trying to take some of the pressure off of Matthew Stafford. Not that Stafford needs to not that he needs to really have that much pressure playing on him. He's playing as well as anybody. He's dealt with a lot of injuries to his wide receiver this year, but they are full strength at this point in time. And I think the Jets just really showed that even against a team like the Jaguars, who haven't been crazy in the offensive category this year, you know, obviously, and even had a backup quarterback last week, they're giving up a lot of points and just bleeding points. So I think that the Rams are going to be able to take advantage of that. And I think that, you know, there's no way they're going to give up as many yards to like Devontae Adams as the Jaguars did last week. So I'm going with the Rams to go into New York and get a win and, you know, further secure their, you know, themselves as the division leader. Moving on, we have Philadelphia going to Washington. Obviously, a huge game for Washington. They lost against the Eagles in what was somewhat of a nail biter until the end of the game in their previous game earlier this year. You know, I kind of knew that it would probably be tough for Washington. I think Philadelphia's defense is playing very, very well. I think that, you know, this second time, I mean, anything can really go down. The Eagles obviously, you know, did well against a Steelers team that I think many people were very high on going into the week. And then after the week, it's like, oh, yeah, we were singing the praises of Russell Wilson, and he just did not play very well. And it was a very, you know, bad game for each of them, you know. And then Washington last week, as we all know, a kind of nail biter where it came down to a 2-point conversion, you know, and they only won by one. But, you know, after a bye, you kind of like to see those gritty wins, and they still played with a lot of confidence. And that is what they're going to need, you know, against Philadelphia. I think that they do match up well, and I think that they can, you know, limit Saquon and really, you know, make it hard on AJ Brown because Lattimore is now playing and he looked very good last week. Not to say that the Saints obviously don't have a wide receiver at the caliber of AJ Brown, but I think it's going to help a lot now that you have like a gritty number one corner that is going to get in his face, and it's going to make it very hard for Jalen Hurts to get the ball to him. So it's really going to come down to like how well Hurts can throw it to his tight ends as well as Devonta Smith, the Reaper. But I think that, you know, looking at this, I'm gonna have to go. Have to go with Philadelphia just because I think they are the better and more talented team. And I think Washington is going to have to play out of their minds. But I'm going to say Philadelphia by 3 points. Moving on to Giants Falcons. As we all know, Kirk Cousins benched this week. I personally think that it should have happened a couple of weeks ago. I mean, maybe the reason why they Maybe, maybe the reason they didn't do it was because they didn't want to throw Penix to the Wolves against tougher opponents. But it's like, you could have I mean, obviously they won their last game, but it's like they barely beat the Raiders, and the Raiders, were able to do two shots at the end zone to potentially win that game. And that doesn't really give you much confidence in terms of how the offense has been. People want to blame that they don't run enough play action. And it's like, if you need to run so much play action, to get these bootlegs and these separators, create easy throwing lanes for your QB, maybe you shouldn't have paid him so much money. But that's another topic for another time. The Giants have been scrappy this year. They, pretty sure they're going to be starting DeVito in this game. And, overall, just not a very good team this year, obviously. Looking for them to rebound because they did have a pretty decent draft class this year of guys that, haven't played the best, obviously, but, definitely aren't like, oh, yeah, we can't have this guy starting on our team. But looking at this, I'm going to say the Falcons win. I think that Penix is just going to show them that, hey, he brings a lot more to the table than a Kirk Cousins that is even more mobile than he used to be when he didn't run at all really that much before his injury. And Penix is athletic, has a strong arm, and was, from what I understand it, deemed the most QB ready player the most QB ready prospect in the draft, being that he's, a little bit older than the other QBs, had played a lot, but his fundamentals are good. And I did like what I saw in preseason. But I think that, yeah, barring that, the pressure really gets to him or he has first game jitters, which I just don't think will be the case, the Falcons are going to win this game. Moving on, we have Cardinals Panthers. The Cardinals still really clinging to potentially playing very, very well. The Panthers, obviously, last week getting smoked by the Cowboys, after they had competed against some good teams the weeks prior, and overall, Carolina just, they kind of tapered off, I feel like, and Bryce Young didn't play very well. Now Arizona, obviously, playing last week and winning, I'm pretty sure. I'm trying to remember who they played. That's right. They played the New England, and James Conner really did very, very well. I think that, Arizona is going to go into Carolina and they're going to be able to run the football really well because Rico Dowdle ran all over them, and I think that Carolina is going to lack a pass rush to get after Kyler Murray. And that's just one thing you need against him, more than anyone else, because he can just wear your defense down with these long extended plays. But I'm taking the Cardinals in this one to really kind of continue to try and cling to their playoff hopes, hoping, the Rams drop a game here in the final 3 weeks. Browns, Bengals, this game looks, obviously, like, the Bengals might blow out, the Browns, who haven't been able to really score, all too much. But then you think about how bad Cincinnati's defense is, and I just think that, Jameis Winston could have a day. I will say the Bengals, even though their defense has been really bad this year, they have been somewhat opportunistic. And obviously they have to win out to make the playoffs, The Broncos losing last night helped them, and they need them to continue to lose, obviously, to, try and get in. But yeah, the Bengals, I expect, are gonna really light it up, and maybe this will be a good test to see whether, Ja'Marr Chase does still, really well against, this DB room, and Burrow getting, the pass rush coming after him, led by Myles Garrett. I'm still going to pick the Bengals. I think that they're going to be able to score a lot more, but yeah, don't be surprised if this ends up being a kind of weird game, where it's like where a couple of errors here and there, depending on what team at key moments, determine the game. Titans Colts, a divisional game of the AFC South. Now, the Colts last week, they lost. Against Denver. That game was close up until, I guess the fumble return, which is funny because it was a backwards pass, and I guess, they are saying that Will Levis is going to play. Will Levis left that game because he kept on throwing too many picks early. And Will Levis last week, kept on throwing picks. They still only lost by 10 against the Bengals last week. But overall, I just wonder if he's going to do that against a Colts defense that's still clinging to try and make the postseason as well. And they're going to home. But I expect Indianapolis to win this game, and keep their slim playoff hopes alive, much like the Bengals. Lions Bears. As we all know, last week, Aleem McNeil had an injury and David Montgomery, two really key pieces, were, and obviously last week, the huge game against the Bills. But it's interesting. They're saying that, let me look at this. They are saying that I guess Montgomery, doesn't need to get surgery, which would end his season, and that he would be able to play. I think this will show us, how the Lions can adapt in this game, and no better of an opponent to do it against than the Bears, who just look very. To me, people were saying, the body language of Caleb Williams. Yes, he looks very defeated, and it just doesn't look good in Chicago, very, very bad. But I'll also say that their defense isn't playing with that much energy. I was like, this is insane. Like, you're up against a divisional opponent. You guys have no energy. So it's like the end of the season here, it could look worse and worse and worse, for the Bears. And it's like, who's going to want to come in and take over this team, after this, the way they looked last week, they've really got to play their tails off this week, but obviously, I'm going with Detroit. It's, I find it crazy that Detroit is only favored by 6.5 points. What do they think? Montgomery was their main power horse scorer, and I guess he kind of was, but it's like Gibbs is pretty capable, but you don't want to put all the pressure on him to be a workhorse when obviously since he's been here, he's been, a tandem running back, where it's like, he's got the talent, he's got the speed, he's always a touch away from a touchdown and that sort of thing. But I think this will really show us about Detroit on whether or not they can really still dominate games and even, still hold the Bears down, because it's not like they aren't without talent. But we'll really start to see, whether the Aleem McNeil injury is going to really throw this defense out the window, in terms of how many injuries they've sustained to key players. But I'm going with the Lions, of course. I think you'd be a fool to bet on the Bears. And we're moving on. Vikings Seahawks, a very interesting game. Obviously, as we know, when the Seahawks lost on Sunday Night Football, from Sunday Night Football, the Seahawks just didn't look very good. And clearly, I wonder if I don't think Geno Smith is playing this game. I'm pretty sure he's like injured. Oh, he doesn't have an injury designation. it's so strange to me how some of these guys don't have an injury designation, even though it was claimed to be really bad, and they said it was a knee injury to Gino. Not like he was extremely mobile before, and against a Brian Flores defense, I think it's going to be tough for Gino. I think it would be tough for Howell as well. I think it would be tough for anybody because the Seattle Seahawks, they really need to be able to run it. And the Vikings are not bad against the run at all. So you're really looking for JSN, Metcalf, and Lockett to carry this team. But it's like, what are you going to be able to do? You're not going to be able to throw it deep. You're going to have to do a lot of underneath stuff because of the pressure that the Vikings bring. And, how many pass rushing attackers they have. So, it'd be huge for Seattle to be able to win this thing. But I just don't see it. And I think the Vikings are going to go into Seattle and, and beat them, to be honest with you. So I'm going with the Vikings. Patriots Bills, probably one of the more easy games for the Bills. A division rival, yes, but it's like, when you've got 83% odds to win and a 14-point advantage because you just handled what was arguably the best team in the NFL going into last week in the Lions, I just don't see any reason to worry, especially at home. It's kind of crazy. The Bills have only had 6 home games, this year. Obviously, could be snowing, but I don't really think it matters, what the weather's going to be like because the Bills can play, and maybe this could serve as a boost. It's not like New England is a super, I mean, their record is bad, don't get me wrong, but it's not like they are a pushover, and I think that Drake May has been very accurate and been very good since he started. Could have potentially been in the running if he had started right away and played how he has been playing all year. But, I don't think it's going to be a gimme of a game in terms of the defense. They're going to have some good red zone defense, against this team because I think that Drake May has just been very good and very efficient at getting completions. I'm still going with the Bills, obviously, but the point I'm trying to make is that maybe the Bills defense could really try to improve and better themselves from week to week, and try to give Drake May problems because it's not like he's been a terrible quarterback. But going with the Bills over the Patriots in Buffalo. Now we have Jaguars Raiders. I'm gonna go with the Jaguars in this game. This is kind of, I don't know if the Jaguars are trying to tank. I think they have enough talent. I think that they're trying to, I think that Doug Peterson is potentially trying to save his job, and that sort of thing. But it's like, looking at this game, I think that I just don't really know to go with. Heck with it. I'll go with the Raiders because they're the home team. They are favored by 2. Dash, that I'm flipping my prediction. I'm going with the Jaguars as, my underdog pick. It hasn't been that many underdog picks. I don't think I've picked a single underdog this week. But yeah, we're gonna go with the Jaguars over the Raiders. I'm not gonna lie, I don't really want to talk about this game too much, and that sort of thing. But moving on, we have 49ers Dolphins, 2 teams that it is a long shot for them to make the postseason. I'd say for San Fran, it's a little bit more likely for them to potentially make the postseason if they were to win out. But the Dolphins are still clinging, to it. And it's like San Fran has just one of these teams is going to win and be 7-8, barring a tie, which would be ridiculous, eliminating them both from playoff contention. But I think that I think that Tua, playing the way he did last week, I think that, he's going to come back and he's going to look like the ace that we all know. And I think that San Fran, I just don't think they're going to play well enough to keep up with the Dolphins scoring wise. And it's not like Miami didn't have every chance to potentially win or tie or, draw the game close against the Texans last week, but I think that this week they'll correct the errors. I don't expect that, that type of performance from Tua 2 games in a row. He's too accurate. He's just too good to really have, 2 off games in a row, in my opinion. So I'm going with the Dolphins over San Fran at Hard Rock Stadium. Moving on to Sunday Night Football, we have Tampa Bay and Dallas. Obviously, Tampa Bay, as we all know, last week dominated their game, really showed that, yeah, hey, we're gonna hold on to this. We're gonna hold on to this division, and we're not gonna let up. The Cowboys obviously dominating the Panthers, which, you might be able to say that, like, hey, it's not much of an accomplishment. The Panthers have a bad record, but the Panthers had competed, and Rico Dowdle, came alive, and I think that they do need to use him more. Like when they said they liked him and they wanted to use him more and more, they weren't really doing that up until last week. And it's like, I don't, McCarthy is an oddball. He loves the pass way too much. I think he just needs to stay reserved and not think that every play can be a pass dominant play. But I'm looking at this game, as we know, Dallas really sucks at home. I'm going to take Tampa Bay, in an NFC showdown. Obviously, Dallas has a very, very slim chance to make the playoffs. They might, they're really trying to recoup their season. There's so many of these 6-8 teams this week that it's like, oh yeah, that's a must win. But I just don't think, I think that Tampa Bay is going to line up and they're going to dominate, and I think that Baker just has an O-line that is, not going to let Micah Parsons get to him all the time, So I'm going with Tampa Bay over Dallas in Texas. Moving on to Monday night, we obviously have my Packers hosting the New Orleans Saints. As we know, the New Orleans Saints came kind of close to winning last week against the Washington Commanders, and now I'm looking at who's starting at QB because I don't think it's Carr. Yeah, Carr is still doubtful. They are starting Rattler, even though Jake Hayner started last week. Alvin Kamara is doubtful. It's looking bad. Even if Kamara plays off of a doubtful, kind of injury designation, I personally think that looking at this game, it's like, the Packers, as far as I'm concerned, are at full strength, have been at full strength and that sort of thing, and have been playing very, very well, but, looking at the defense, Quay Walker is questionable, Javon Bullard questionable, but I think that, looking at this game, Jair Alexander is designated to return, and overall it's just one of those things to me that it's like, if you're the Saints, what ammunition do you have to keep up? Even Marquez Valdes-Scantling, who, former Packer, might want to try and, create some wows against his, former team, not that he couldn't have come back to us, but But you know, what other what other weapons do you really have? And it's like, to me, you're looking at, the O line of, the Saints. They haven't really been the best at protecting the quarterback. And the Packers are just coming off a reeling 7-sack game against Seattle. And don't get me wrong, Rattler looks like he looks like, he can be mobile, he can be squirrely and that sort of thing, but then he does look like kind of a risk taker with the way that he throws the ball. And I get it, not taking a sack and trying to put the ball into the field of play and that sort of thing, but it's just overall kind of bad. And I, looking at the Seattle defense, they are going to have to play well, and they're going to have to try and force mistakes out of Love, which hasn't happened in weeks now, you know, and I think that, with Love being, having the mobility that he, has, and, the comfortability that he's, attained with becoming healthy, at this time of the year, I think I just don't see New Orleans having the firepower to keep up with Green Bay, especially in Lambeau. Could potentially snow. It'd be really bad for New Orleans, who doesn't have their workhorse back, and their backup is Keandre Miller. But looking at, the Packers, very few injuries at this point in the season, only a couple of guys on IR, and or a few guys on IR, and I just think that this is going to be another dominant win, and they're going to keep up their hot streak. So I'm going with my Packers, of course, over New Orleans at Lambeau Field. But if you guys have any opinions on any of the games, if you have any, thoughts you'd like to share in the comments, or if you want more NFL content like this, right now I'm posting twice a week. Might try to increase that here. I'm thinking about doing like a special sort of playoffs, playoff prediction segment of like, what the likely teams are here in the coming weeks, as a preview of things to come, of like weaknesses between playoff teams, and like matchups that I think, will prove interesting in the playoffs, or maybe of that nature. But at least delving into like what I think the weaknesses are of every single playoff team. But if you guys do subscribe and you stick around, I thank you. And this is Cast, and I'm your host, Cassidy Streeter. And as always, go Pack, go.